From the lost city of Atlantis to the shipwrecked Titanic, we humans have been entranced by the things we've lost to the sea. There's just something otherworldly about underwater cities and abandoned ships. It's intoxicating to think that out there, beyond the shallow water where the old maps used to warn us about dragons, there are entire vessels constructed ages ago and just forgotten, left to rot. Not all abandoned ships are the stuff of legends. There are also abandoned ships that are much closer. Just check out Google Maps and you'll find picture after picture of listing ships in sunny tropical bays or haunting vessels floating just offshore, quietly staring down at the nearby villages. Today, let's take a brief tour of some of the biggest abandoned ships from around the world. To start, we have some questions. For example, how do you lose track of something as big as a ship? How did they get to their final destinations, and why were they abandoned in the first place? So, let's dive into it. Ships are often huge. They're also equipped with redundant location systems. So how are you supposed to simply lose one, even in the vastness of the sea? The 2,300-ton MV Alta may know the answer, but it won't be able to tell us much. It was a ship first built in 1976 in Tanzania. In 2018, after several changes in ownership, the Alta sailed from Greece to Haiti. The ship stalled out in the middle of the Atlantic. Its 10 crew members were stranded some 1,400 miles away from assistance, so they waited for help, receiving airlifts of food, and eventually they got a ride to safety. The Alta was less lucky. It was left afloat in international waters. In August 2019, sailors with Britain's Royal Navy caught sight of it. They radioed the ship and got no answer, and that was the last time anyone saw the ship for several months. In February 2020, near Cork in Ireland, locals were surveying the harsh weather's impact on their coast. When the storm was over, locals noticed something strange. Perched on one outcropping, marooned where no ship had been present the day before, was a huge vessel. Nobody knew if anyone was inside, and nobody had any idea how it had gotten there. Once it was safe to do so, the Irish Coast Guard sent a helicopter to check it out. A quick attempt to locate and communicate with any crew members yielded a puzzling result. There was no one on board. A few quick calls and some maritime forensic work gave them an ID for the 2,300-ton craft. It was the MV Alta, a merchant vessel, a ghost ship, long floating the tumultuous waters of the Atlantic Ocean by itself. It had made its arrival in a mysterious manner. Ireland is usually surrounded by hundreds of fishing boats, and the MV Alta, a big vessel, had managed to make it past that barrier, seemingly just popping up overnight. The MV Alta became an overnight sensation. It seemed like it might slip off the coastline at any time, but authorities had to wait for low tide in order to figure out what to do with this new shipwreck. When they were able to make it out to the Alta, they realized something rather odd. The Alta had a brand new movement tracking system installed, but it had been deactivated. This was very unusual, and it can sometimes be a sign that the ship has been involved in shady activities. Further analysis of the circumstances surrounding the ship's abandonment also puzzled the authorities. For example, the Greece to Haiti trip itself seemed ambitious for the size and type of ship. As of the end of 2020, ownership has still not been established. The costs of dealing with the wreck will be considerable, and Cork and its inhabitants are currently debating options for managing the wreckage. Will they tow it out and let it sink? Will they dismantle and scrap it? Or will they leave it there as a strange local story, a reminder to leave your GPS on? In January of 2014, British tabloids began to tell alarming stories about a mysterious ship floating off the coast of England. As interesting as that might have been in and of itself, the tabloids introduced a twist in the tale to make the event seem even more disturbing and dangerous, because of course they did. Tabloids are gonna tabloid. The mysterious ship, they reported, was full of cannibal rats. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, the existence of actual cannibalistic rodents was never proven. However, the mysterious ghost ship was at least based off real events. In 1976, the 90-meter Lyubov Orlova was first constructed as a cruise ship for Antarctic voyages. For this reason, the hull was strengthened to be safe in icy waters. In 2010, the ship had completed many cruises over its decades of service. It was sent on a final voyage across the Atlantic to America for decommissioning. It was seemingly still operational, but its owners had racked up up $250,000 in debt, so the Lyubov Orlova was going to be sold to cover those costs. Additionally, the 51 crew members of the ship hadn't received any pay in 5 months. Accordingly, the ship was seized in Canada and prepared to be sold for parts. After waiting in harbor for over 2 years, the ship was ready to be towed down to the Dominican Republic for scrapping. Unfortunately, as the ship was being towed to its final destination, the tow line broke. The crew aboard the towing boat tried to reconnect the line, but the winds and waves were too strong. Ultimately, the ship started to drift eastward. Later, in 2013, after years of drifting, the ship was spotted some 1,300 nautical miles from the Irish coast. Icelandic and Irish news stories began to circulate, each telling the story of a ghost ship, a modern Flying Dutchman. British tabloids took the story and ran with it, saying a ghost ship carrying nothing but disease-ridden rats could be about to make land on Britain's shores. Experts have warned. The source for the rat tip? Well, that was one sole expert. As it turns out, that expert was a Belgian salvage hunter. Then, unfortunately, or again, perhaps fortunately, he switched up his story when interviewed by other prominent news sources, saying, I think that maybe if there were rats at all, they'd probably died anyway because it's a year ago. They can't survive longer than 4 or 5 days without water and food, so it's probably empty. Great reporting there, tabloid newspapers. The Lyubov Orlova has not been sighted since, and most believe that it's sunk. Still, the image of a moving castle of crazed, hungry rodents moving closer and closer to the British Isles had captivated the world's imagination. To this day, if you Google cannibal rat ship, the ship's name dominates the search results, an enduring legacy for sure. Easily visible on Google Maps lies a half-submerged cruise ship cutting through the bright blue waters of the Solomon Islands Bay like an eerie grin. The MS World Discoverer, an 87-meter vessel, was outfitted for luxury experiences. Among the experiences most prized aboard the Discoverer were educational offerings. Each day, the cruise featured presentations and even shore expeditions led by marine biologists, naturalists, geologists, and historians. The vessel was scheduled for an inspection and further construction, including the addition of 2 more elevated suites to state-of-the-art fire protection system, but that never happened. The story of the MS World Discoverer is unfortunately an ironic one. It was a cruise ship built to travel icy seas and temperate ones alike. The Discoverer carried passengers from Antarctica to the Falkland Islands, Chile, and Argentina. When it was constructed in Germany in 1974, its architects reinforced its hull to make sure that it could handle submerged ice. In fact, its double-hulled construction was one of its selling points. In theory, it would allow passengers to safely watch the movement of icebergs up close and personal. Unfortunately, instead of ice, the Discoverer met its match against a submerged tropical coral reef in 2000. Once the crew of the Discoverer realized what was happening, they grounded the ship in the Solomon Islands to avoid a fatal wreck. Officials on land received their distress signal and ferried everyone on board to safety. Very soon after the Discoverer was grounded, it was listing or angled at 20 degrees. At this angle, it would have been just possible to hold yourself upright, but only barely. As the ship was listing further, slowly but surely, the crew decided that it was safer to cut their losses and run. Since 2000, several companies have attempted to lay claim to the ship, at the very least for the cost of scrap metal. However, any valuable materials aboard were found and used and sold by locals who looted the ship. Over the 20-plus years since it was abandoned, tidal activity has allowed it to slip further and further into the water and sped up the deterioration of the vessel's interior. Now the Discoverer is listing at 46 degrees. However, the ship is accessible, but it's very likely that soon the ship will finally break in half and sink to its final watery resting place. Sometimes when a ship goes down, it's an accident. Other times, there are indications that there could be something more fishy at play. Here's the story. MV Evangelia was first built in Northern Ireland in 1942 during the Second World War. Its initial name was the Empire Strength, and its purpose was to transport vital supplies, mainly frozen beef, to and from various ports to help keep soldiers fed. Over the span of its life, the ship would have many names. It was called the Saxon Star in the late 1940s, the Red Brook in the early 1960s, and finally the Evangelia in 1965 when she was purchased by her final owners. They were Greek, and they used the Evangelia as a refrigerated cargo ship for 3 years before abandoning the vessel near modern-day Croatia. Today you can easily take out a rowboat and paddle or even swim through the Evangelia's wreckage. It suffered an almost perfect fracture down the center of its frame. On the starboard side, it's clear that much of the ship's plating has gone missing and the entire center of the Evangelia has collapsed. The hull, now beautifully corroded, has broken off and begun to slowly sink. So, how did the Evangelia get to be 30 kilometers north of Constanta in Croatia? While the precise story's never been confirmed, there are those that believe that the reason it's never been clarified is because the reasons were murky at best. No entity has laid claim to the ship. One theory is that it was done as an insurance fraud. Given that the Evangelia was a highly capable ship with a spotless service record and it was extremely close to its destination port when it was abandoned in well-mapped waters, it seems unlikely to many that the damage on the ship was caused by accident. So I really hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.